My name is Obiahono Kaiwale, and I'm here to give you an introduction to software version control using Git. In order to talk about software version control, we'll cover some topics today. We'll start with version control, go through Git and GitHub, and end with a practical example of using Git and GitHub for version control. First, what is version control? Version control is a mechanism for storing files or changes to a set of files. It's useful for any type of files, including source code, which will be covered in this tutorial. And it's a recommended best practice, which means that for any developer or designer working on the software development, it's recommended to use version control. And because it's recommended, it's a required skill for many designers and developers. If it's a required skill, why use version control in the first place? Version control is used to enable collaboration among many developers. For example, I've worked on a project where there were about 750 developers actively working on the same source code. When you have that many developers, it's difficult to enable collaboration. Someone makes changes to a file, and someone else needs those changes or is making changes to the same file at the same time. The only practical way to collaborate among many developers at scale is to use version control. Version control also serves as a backup for source code, and it provides a history of changes you've made to the source code. And because you have that history of changes, you can easily go back to a previous version of the code in case your current version is not working well. To discuss version control, we'll cover two main topics, Git and GitHub. Those are two distinct things. So we'll start with Git. Git is an open source version control software. It was developed while developing the Linux kernel to enable collaboration among the developers working on the kernel. It's fast, efficient, reliable, and popular. One important reason why it's popular, it's popular because it's important for Git to be popular because when you have a software that is popular, you can easily find help online. Say you're going to Stack Overflow or any other forum. When there's a popular software, you can easily find a large community that can offer help to your problems. But Git isn't the only software you can use for version control. There's CVS, SVN, Mercurial, Acuref, and many more. GitHub, on the other hand, is a company that provides a server that runs Git. Essentially, it is Git in the cloud. And you can access GitHub at github.com. So GitHub provides tools that makes Git very easy to use. But like GitHub isn't the only option out there to use Git in the cloud. You have Bitbucket, SourceForge, Gary, and many other competitors. But GitHub is a very popular option, so we'll use GitHub in this tutorial. Before we dig deep into Git and GitHub, just cover some terminology that's important for Git. The first is a repository. This is a place where the source control files are stored. Essentially, it's your code base. So using the analogy of writing source code on your laptop, the folder where all your code is stored, the base folder will be your repository. A branch, on the other hand, is an independent copy of the source controlled files. So a branch is always related to a repository. So when you have a repository, you have a base branch, which most times is called the master branch. But that is the branch that is automatically created when you have a repository. When you want to make changes to the source code, it's advised to create a separate branch to isolate your changes from the master branch. So you work on your changes in your separate branch, and then you submit your changes to the repository through your branch. To illustrate this workflow, we have a simplified version of the Git workflow, where you have the repository and you have the Git command to use to make changes and submit your code to the repository. When you are creating a new project, you don't have a repository yet, so you do git init. This basically initializes your local folder on your laptop to a Git repository. You make your changes, you write your code, and then you do a Git add to add the changes you've made in your Git workspace. Now, it is still on your local laptop. When you've added all the changes you want to make, you commit it. Commit is more like you save a version of your changes. And when you've committed your changes, then you can push your changes to the repository. Now, this workflow is very important when the repository is not on your laptop. So, for example, you're writing code on your laptop, and the repository is github.com. So when you push your changes, it goes over the internet to github.com. So later, you come back and you want to make changes to the code you have submitted in the repository. Now, in this case, you are not starting from scratch. So you start by doing git clone. Git clone will make a copy of the remote repository, the code you have on github.com, and download it to your laptop. Then you can make your changes again, and you go through the similar workflow of you doing git add to add your changes, you do commit to save a version of your changes, and then you do git push to submit your changes back into the repo. So now we'll move on to a practical example to demonstrate how this workflow will work when developing some software. To follow along with this practical tutorial, there are several things you need to have set up already. The first is the Atom editor, which is just you can use any text editor, but at Africode we recommend using the Atom editor just to have a common tool for all tutorials. Next, you need Git installed on your laptop, and you need a GitHub account. The goal of this tutorial is to create a web page that shows a geochart. A geochart is a map, essentially, with countries or any other geographical region shown on the map. This is just a simplified example with simple code. So the code isn't called to the example. What is called to this example is demonstrating the Git workflow. We'll walk through a team collaboration process, and hopefully everyone can participate. So we'll start by showing an example of what we're trying to create. This is an example of a geochart. So our final product will look similar to this, where you have a map of Africa and you have some red markers on several countries. I'll walk through creating the process, so don't worry about how to get to that point. So we start by just creating a folder where we want our code to live. So here we have a folder Africode, and I will just create it. Tutorial version 1. Okay. So here I will create a new file and call it index.html. This is the file where we'll put our code. Now, writing the code isn't called to this tutorial, so I'll skip over writing the code and just jump straight ahead to the final product. I'll save the final version here in our index.html, but I'll take out all that. So now I'll walk through the code just to explain what the code does. So this code uses a Google library to create a map. In this case, we are creating a map of Africa with countries. So we start by, loading the map from the Google library, and then telling it the package we want. We want the GeoChart package. In that package, we're going to just load up some data here. We have not created the data yet, but we're going to put some data here in Africode countries, and then map is able to look through the data and create markers for every country. So say I put Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya or Sudan, any country I put, the code can iterate through the data and put markers for each of the country. So it's a relatively simple code, and I wouldn't dig too deep into into the mechanics of the working of the code. So what I want to do is actually say go to the Git workflow. So I will feed into the directory. That's tutorial here. And because this is a new Git, this is a new source code, this is new code base, I'll have to initialize it. So referencing the tutorial, I have to the workflow. I will start with git init. It says it's initialize an empty repository. Okay, so now I can check the status and repo, and it says, oh, you have one file that you haven't done anything to. The file is not tracked in Git. So I'll say, okay, git add that file, index.html. If I check git status again, it's okay. You've added the file, but you have not committed it yet. Next, I will say git commit. Add a comment. It's very good to always add a comment so you know what changes you are making or you have made if you're looking at it from sometime in the future. So now I will say initialize field chart. Map of Africa. Okay. Now we've committed it. I can check the status again. And it says there's nothing. So that means I've saved all my changes. But we want this code to live in GitHub. So what we need to do is to go create the repo in github.com. So here is GitHub, and we can create a new repo and just call it code 5. This is under my personal GitHub account, but I'll make it a public project so other people can contribute to it. And I create a repo. Now GitHub is kind enough to provide some hints of how to use this repo by telling you the commands you can use. It's typically better to use HTTPS instead of SSH, because when you use SSH, you have to set up your SSH keys, and it's much easier to avoid that setup and avoid the complications that can come from that setup by simply using HTTPS. So now I have created this repo, and I've called it Africode v5. So what I need to do is to tell my local code on my laptop where this remote repo is located. So I will copy this. Or as GitHub says, if you have an existing repo, which I do, I can just copy this. It's the same command. So I will paste it here. And I've now told my local code where to send the code to get to GitHub. What I need to do is copy this and push it to the master I mentioned earlier that when you create a repo, it automatically creates a branch called the master. For the purpose of initializing the repo, we can push the master. But when you're making changes to an existing repo, it is best not to push the master and to use a different branch. And we'll cover how to do that in this tutorial. So I'll paste that and push the master. Now I need to put in my credentials to GitHub. And it sent it. Okay. So now we can go to GitHub and look and try and find if the changes have come in here. And they have. So here it says, I've initialized geochart to map of Africa. And we can look at the code and it's what we expect. Now I'll go to the workflow of being a developer who comes in later and wants to make changes to this map. So which takes us through the second part of this Git workflow using Git clone. So I go back to my stuff and I say, okay, create a new folder and assume a new personality and say, call this Git developer. I'm a new developer coming in and I want to work on this code. The first thing I need to do is just create a new terminal. So I need to go into Git developer. Okay, so there's nothing here. So now I need to clone the Git repo. So here Git says click here to clone or download and copy this to clipboard. So I've copied this link essentially. To use it, I'll say okay, Git clone and paste the link. And actually it's clone right here. Put it in this directory. So this dot and slash is asterisk. It's optional, sorry. But if you put it, it specifies this directory. So it says, okay, this is here. And it puts it. So if we list what we have, you see index.html is now here. This Git folder is used to store Git configurations. And for a simple workflow, you wouldn't need to make changes here. But if you are fairly confident in using Git and you want to customize your Git experience, you can change the configurations in that Git folder. In this tutorial, I will not make any changes there. So now we have index.html. To demonstrate another aspect of using Git, and say you have several developers working at the same time, I'll create a new folder and say I am Git dev developer. And I'll do the same thing here and say okay. Create a new terminal. Now go into Git developer. I misspelled developer. So I'll correct that. I'll do the same thing I did here and do a Git clone to clone that same thing. So this creates a scenario where you have two developers working on the same code at the same time. And you have this here also. Okay. What we'll do is to actually add some data. So using the final as the guide, we open Git developer and we make changes here. So like I mentioned, before you make changes, you need to create a branch. So what we can do here is say git branch and create a branch called git developer. You can name this branch any name. I'm just calling git developer to match it to the name of the user. Then we'll say git checkout developer to switch to that branch. Here it tells you switch to the branch git developer. Then you go make some changes. And I can just copy this. Paste it here and say, okay. I want to add somebody here and say, okay. All the changes you have to make in tutorial is just to add a line here with your name and country to register yourself on the map. So I'll add myself. Obiahono Kaiwale, and the country is Nigeria. It's important to add a comma at the end to make it easy for other people to also add their line. So once I've done that, I'm here, I can check my Git status. The Git says I've modified index.html, which is correct. So now I'll say git add, I'll save index.html, and I'll say git commit. A little bit on the Africode map. I've added that. Once you add this, you can now push your changes to the repo. So now we want to save this to GitHub. But remember, we're working on a Git developer branch. So what we do is git push origin. But instead of using master, we say git developer. And ask my credentials again. I'll put that in. So now I have saved my changes. But that's not the final step. If you go back to GitHub, now GitHub is nice enough to have this notification here saying that Git developer has submitted a change. So what you need to do is to compare and do your pull request. When you submit changes from a branch, the way to get the changes into the master branch is through a pull request. So I'll do the pull request, and this looks fine. You're comparing the master branch to the Git developer branch. And Git says it's able to merge fine. So there are no issues with that. Add that behind to the map. So I can leave a comment now and say, good to see.
Obi.
So GitHub says, is this what you want? And yes, this is what I want. So I'll confirm the merge. And now we have this. So because we are done with Git developer branch, we can delete the branch. This is usually a best practice to clean up the branch when you're done. If you want to reuse the branch, you can keep it around. But in this case, we don't need to use the branch for anything else. So we can just delete the branch. And you can always restore the branch later if you need it, if you change your mind. So this is not a final change. If you delete the branch and you want it back, you can always restore the branch. So now we've deleted the branch, so we can go to our code. and check our index.html. And here we have Obiang on the map. So now, assuming I'm a second developer, Git developer 2, and I also want to make changes at the same time. If I open this to Git developer 2 and make changes. So I'll copy similar structure just to save time. It's a, Africode instructor. And put the country as Algeria, for example. Any country. So I'm a second developer trying to make changes to the code. So I do this. I go to the terminal and I check my status. It says I've modified this, okay. So I will add it. So then I'll commit it. Okay. So after submitting it, the next step is to push the changes. I'm submitting it through the Git developer branch. Oh, I forgot to create a branch. Sorry about that. So I'll switch to that branch, and I'll try this again. As for my potentials, and I'll submit them. Okay, so now I've submitted the branch. So the reason I created two developers is to simulate the issue where you have a merge conflict. You have to be putting changes at the same time, and this illustrates one of the areas where version control really shines, resolving conflicts. When you have multiple people submitting code at the same time, you tend to have conflicts. So we can look through the conflict and see how to resolve the conflict. So here we say Git developer 2 has submitted it. Okay, compare and do your pull request. And now we have a conflict. Git says, hey, we cannot automatically merge it, so you need to review this manually. And I'll go over why there is a conflict. So don't worry. So we can start the pull request and just see the changes. Going to add a comment, just go straight ahead and see what happens. So now GitHub tell you through Git that there's a conflict. So you can go and resolve the conflict if you want. So you can use the web editor, like it's one of the tools that GitHub provides, or the command line if you want to do it yourself. So here I can say, okay, resolve conflict to see what the issue is. The issue here is that Git developer 1 submitted Obiang. Git developer 2 submitted Africode instructor. Because these two changes happen at the same place, Git cannot tell how to deal with both of them. Now, because we know the code, and this is where your knowledge of the code comes in. We know the code, so we know that what we really want to do is to have both of them. So we can make the changes right here in the web editor and just delete this and have both of them. Or we can make the changes in our command line and text editor. So I'll also go through that. So if we make it in the web editor, we can just save the changes and mark it as resolved. But that's not what I want to demonstrate how to do it through the command line. In case you have a lot of changes, If it's just one change, it's easy to do it in a web editor, but say there are 200 lines or 1,000 lines, and how do you resolve that? So to do that, the first thing we need to do is to get the changes from the master, pulling the changes, and here we get, oh, okay, there's a merge conflict. So we say git merge. And it says here you need to fix them in the work tree. So here, if we go into our code, we can see that Git has done a similar thing and has put the changes here. And then we need to fix this. So go to the similar process, and I can just put this beneath it because that came first. This looks good. We've added the changes and we've resolved the merge conflict. This is what we want the code to be. So we'll go back and we can run git merge again to see what happens. Okay, git is still saying that, so we need to add the files that we've done. Confirm that something hasn't changed. Nope, it's what we want. And we add index.html. Fixed. So we push the origin. Okay, I think the merge conflict is fixed now. So we will not save changes we did here. Just go back to this, delete it. And you can say we want to do a new pull request. Compare it with Git Developer 2. And now Git says, yes, you can merge fine. So now it's showing the change that was made, which is to add Africode instructor. So we view the pull request, because now this is just showing the pull request. And so view the pull request. And say, okay, just add a comment, say, changes look good. We'll merge the pull request. Okay, so this has been done. Now we can delete the branch. So if we go to the code, and we can check the code, we can see that now we have these two, Nigeria and Algeria. So we can, there's a tool actually, HTML preview, where we can put in a link to this file, see how it looks. And here we have it, one for Nigeria, one for Algeria. So the next step now is for you to create your own branch and make your changes, add someone to the map, and submit your changes through a pull request. And we'll see how that workflow goes and if you run into any issues. Okay. Halima and Dirichi, are you ready to start?
Yeah, so I think so I can do it.
Okay.
So do you have to send me like a request, like an invitation to contribute
Yes.
to the repo?
Yeah, so for you to clone the repo, you don't need the request, but for you to submit your changes, I have to add you as a collaborator.
Okay.
So I will go into the settings for this repo, add you as a collaborator. Okay. And what's your name again?
Ola dash Halima. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. So yes, you can just go through the process and see if you have any issues.
Okay, so I'm looking now. I just got the email.
Okay.
And I will open the email and Sorry. Okay. So, and then I clone the repo, make my change, and
You clone the repo, you create your branch,
okay,
make a change, and you commit your change.
okay, okay. I'm about to create my change. So I just have to make an entry with my name and a country in Africa, right?
Yes. Or any name. It doesn't have to be your name, but yeah, you can put your name.
Okay. Oh, and I have to do it in my own branch.
Yeah.
Okay.
In this particular tutorial, we didn't go through putting in policies to enforce a Git workflow. So, for example, we don't enforce code reviewers and we don't enforce submitting through a branch instead of the master branch. But in most other projects, there is an administrator who does the enforcement, who puts those rules in place.
Okay.
So you cannot just try to submit through master or submit a pull request without someone else reviewing it.
I see. So you can have like, so if I try to make a change and someone has to review my change before it can go into master.
Yes.
Okay. Does that affect like me being able to create a branch or no?
No, you can always create a branch.
Okay.
But how you submit your branch back to master is not the issue. It's what you can put rules around.
Okay. I see. And then should I, when I put my entry in, should I also leave the comma at the end of my entry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a particular reason why?
It makes it easier to add another line after your own.
Okay.
So if you don't put a comma, someone adding an entry after yours has to put in a comma for you before they can add their own.
Oh, okay. I see. So, but if I put my comma, then when the next person, they don't have to worry about my line anymore.
Yeah, they can just add their own.
Okay. Okay, so okay, I've just committed to my branch. Then I create a pull request and I send it. Okay. Okay, I'll give you the link to my pull request.
Okay, I think it should show up.
Right. Yes, that's the one.
Okay, good. So now that you have your pull request, we can check the changes that you made. Okay, they added Egypt. Everything looks good. And okay, so you can go ahead with your change. With submitting your pull request.
Okay.
You're submitting your code.
Okay. Let's see. So I click on merge pull request, confirm merge.
Yes.
Okay, I just merged it.
Okay. Okay, so everything looks good. So now you have Algeria and Nigeria, and you just added Egypt. So if I refresh this, so yeah, so Egypt is now on the map essentially, and everything looks good.
Okay.
All right. So that concludes this tutorial. Are there any other questions?
So I have a question. So assuming I'm not on the currently, in this video recording, can I just, if I wanted to like actually add an entry to the file after we're done with this, what do I have to do so I can download or clone the branch by myself, and then do I still need to send you a request, like to be able to contribute to this?
Yes. So if you're doing this later, you can do this procedure. You can clone it, you can add and commit and push. Oh, so you can commit, but you cannot push. Because to push, you need to have access to the repo, and to get access, I have to add you as a collaborator.
Okay.
So you can send me a message, an email, to get permission, and I can give that to you. But you cannot do it on your own. You can just push to the repo on your own.
Okay.
However, you can look up your changes on your local desktop. So if you just go in here and you go to your index.html file, you can just open it in Chrome, and it will show you the map.
Okay. So if I just like download it and then make my change, I can see the changes by myself without having to send it to you.
Yes.
Okay.
You can see the change by yourself. The only thing you need to contact me for is if you want to submit your changes to this remote repo on GitHub. But you
Okay.
don't need to do that.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
So
Are there any other questions?
I don't have anything else.
Okay.
Okay.
That's it. This concludes the tutorial. Thank you all for joining.
Well, thank you, Obi, for teaching the tutorial. It was very helpful. And hopefully you'll join us for the next tutorial.
Yeah.
All right.